Ladies and gentlemen, it is good to be back reviewing cars for you again, and our very first car after the lockdown is this, the Jeep Renegade. Well, you certainly won't mistake it for anything else than a Jeep. So, what is it like? Let's find out together, shall we? Now, as I said, you won't mistake it for anything else than a Jeep. You got these round headlights and the trademarked 7-slot grille. Well, you certainly won't lose it in a car park now, will you? Well, aside from this bright orange paint. Now, the rest of the car, it's all about squares. Well, your side mirrors are square, your wheel arches are squared off, the windows are square, and even when you go to the back, the taillights are square, taking a bit of inspiration from the Wrangler. Now, what this car also has is a lot of Easter eggs. There's actually one by the windshield, one by the taillights, and by the rear windshield. And there's actually more of that inside. So if you want to see all of that, let's hop on board. Now, while we're on the subject of Easter eggs, there's one here by the USB port and the map of Moab in the cubbyhole. Now, the Moab is very, very significant for Jeep because that's where they hold their jamborees every year. And just to remind everyone what car you're driving, they even printed Jeep right here by the seat bottoms. Now, for the other Easter eggs, there are a pair behind the rear view mirror, and they even put 7-slot grills right by the speakers of the car. Now, onto the interior. Now, I was expecting an entry-level Jeep to have, well, in the way of hard plastics and all that, but I was pleasantly surprised. See, the dash, that soft touch, and if there has to be hard plastic in it, they rubberized it. Even this grip handle is rubberized. So, points to them for that. Even the top part of the door cards are soft to touch. Now, as for design, well, you could clearly tell that, well, they want that essence of Jeep in here. You have this grab handle, you have this rather unique looking air conditioning vent, and you got chunky buttons and dials strewn all over the cabin. Now, when it comes to ergonomics, well, I had to get used to some of them. Now, for example, where are the volume controls on the steering wheel? Well, they're not on the steering wheel, they're actually behind it. This button here controls your volume, and on my left hand side, that is your radio station scan, and if you're listening to, let's say, Spotify, it's your button for your next track. And speaking of Spotify, this car is equipped with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. So that is a huge plus, especially now that Apple CarPlay and Android Auto are becoming one of the features consumers are looking for these days. Now, you'd figure because the Renegade is so upright that you'd have loads of headroom, and that's the case here. Now, this seat is in my sitting position, and this is also jacked relatively high up. And you can see I still have a fair amount of headroom despite the panoramic sunroof. Now, we'll get to that later. Front space, actually fairly good. And what I like about it, it has a tilt and telescopic steering wheel, so people with short arms like me don't have to reach out all the way out to be able to hold the steering wheel. Something I also noticed, because of the huge glass area, it feels like there's a lot of light coming into the cabin, and that gives the impression of space. But here in front, space is pretty good. Of course, it is limited by the dimensions of the car, so rear legroom, while decent, it isn't exactly top class. But again, if your friends aren't 6-footers or 6'5" and all that, there's really not much to complain about the space inside the Renegade. Now, this is the only variant, and it is the entry-level variant. So, you don't get cruise control or adaptive cruise control, you don't get automatic headlights, and you don't get power seats. Now, some of you may say that you'd rather have those features than the panoramic sunroof. Some of you would like the panoramic sunroof and those features, but perhaps you'll have to wait a little longer if Jeep Philippines decides to bring in a variant with more features. But for now, this is what you get. Still, I like the fact that it does have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, as I said earlier. Now, I said that rear space isn't exactly class leading, but we'll see for yourself. Now, as I said, legroom isn't class leading, but if the driver in front isn't that tall, i.e. I'm sitting behind myself, there's a fair amount of footroom, legroom, and knee room, as you could see. But say a 6-footer would sit in front, legroom would probably be around here. It's not totally tight, but there is a noticeable decrease in legroom, so to speak. Other things I noticed here at the back, well, the rear door cards are hard plastic, but they do make up for that by trimming the touch points in cloth. Also notice that there's a lot of light coming into the cabin thanks to the panoramic sunroof, and you get big windows, which gives you that airy feeling. I do wish it came with rear air conditioning vents, but given how thin the armrest is, I don't think that's possible. Although I do wish it had, at the very least, charging ports and an armrest. Another thing I noticed is a distinct lack of cubby spaces here at the back. Now, you do get map pockets, magazine pockets here behind the front seats, but I noticed that the door pockets here are rather small. The only thing you could really hold here are bottles because it's in that shape. If they had extended that, you could actually put more things inside. Of course, if you have bigger things, you'll be surprised at the Renegade's cargo area, which we'll take a look at now. The cargo space, if you're smart about packaging, you could fit about 3 overnight bags, relatively large overnight bags, without stacking them on top of each other. And if you need more space, there are cargo nets on each side to put in loose items. I also appreciate that they added tie downs here at the back too. So let's say you're gonna load up a bicycle, a wakeboard, a surfboard, or anything involving, let's say, sporting activities and whatnot, or even hardware, you can be assured that it's not going to be flinging around the cabin, and it can be secured by these and a piece of rope. But if that's not enough space for you, the Renegade comes standard with roof rails, so surfers rejoice. So I had the Renegade for a few days now, and mostly I've spent my time around the city. And I have to say that the Renegade is a competent city runabout. Now, that's not to say it's perfect. I have a couple of things to say about it. But first, the good stuff. One, the windows are huge. So visibility is very easy. This car is very easy to park, also aided by those huge side mirrors. Now, visibility is something that's very, very underrated these days because a lot of cars, they have high waist lines, high belt lines, so that makes them very difficult to see out of it. That's something very refreshing here in the Renegade. Granted, at the back, visibility isn't as stellar, but you have a reverse camera and parking sensors to help you out. Another thing I liked about the Renegade and driving around the city is its steering. Now, it's light, but it's not ultra light in a way that you have zero feel and feedback coursing through the steering wheel. And because of that, you can actually have a bit of fun behind the wheel of this crossover. Now, that's not something we'd usually say, but hey, it works for this one. Of course, that's not to say it's anything like a sports sedan. It's far from it. Well, it is a crossover, so it's never really going to be sporty. But again, you can have a bit of fun behind the wheel. Another thing noteworthy inside the Renegade is the space here at the front. Now, despite its compact dimensions, it's actually pretty good here at the front. And because of the dash design and because you have so much glass area, you're given this impression that you're driving a bigger car. And I also noticed that everything is kind of pushed forward, so adjusting your rear view mirror is actually a bit of a reach in this car. But again, it gives you that impression that you're driving something much bigger. Now, some people may like that, some people don't, and personally, I do like that. Now on to performance. So it's got a 1.4 liter turbo with about 150 horsepower. So that's pretty good figures, but it doesn't always feel like that. One thing I noticed about this engine is there is a noticeable amount of lag, especially when you're coming from low speeds and you want to overtake someone at higher speeds. Now you'd think a car with a 1.4 liter engine would do spectacular fuel economy figures. And when you're on the go, it's actually pretty efficient. Now I'm doing about 14 and a half kilometers per liter with light traffic. But the moment you hit traffic, that's where it starts really dropping off. Now yesterday, I did about 100 kilometers around the city. Mixed conditions, well, most of it traffic. And the Renegade returned just 7.5 kilometers per liter. And that's something you'd expect out of a 2-liter engine, not a 1.4. And I partly blame the transmission for that. Again, it's reluctant to downshift and it's reluctant to upshift. And because of that, the revs of the engine are hanging much higher when you don't want to, and when you want to overtake, it doesn't react quick enough. And again, this car has only done 230 kilometers, so well, maybe the transmission needs a bit of loosening up, breaking in, and to recognize a certain drive pattern. So we hope that customer models will have better fuel economy, especially around the city. What I noticed was this transmission is rather reluctant to downshift or upshift. So when you want to overtake someone, you're still at higher gear, and it takes a while for the transmission to react to a downshift. So what does that mean? That means you pull out of your lane, you're stepping on the gas pedal, and nothing happens until the boost kicks in. When the boost kicks in, this car just shoots forward, but without it, well, you're pretty much standing still. So my advice is, well, you kind of build up the revs a bit before you plan your overtaking maneuver. Now, we're on to the subject of the transmission. It's a dual clutch unit. And at lower speeds, it tends to be a bit, well, jerky, to be honest. But that's not to say it's a totally uncomfortable experience. Now, you have to remember that dual clutch transmissions have to be driven in a different way. They don't like creeping forward in traffic. They don't like inching forward because it still does have a clutch after all. And if you keep doing that, you're going to burn out the clutch. So you have to adapt to this transmission by, let's say in stop and go traffic, let the car in front move forward a little bit further before you step on the gas pedal. Because if you keep on inching forward, the car's just going to keep on juddering and jerking forward. And then another thing I noticed after driving for hundreds and hundreds of kilometers around the city is the ride. Now, it's not stiff, it's not harsh, but it is on the firm side, I'll give you that. It's not going to be as supple as you think, because road imperfections and big bumps, you do feel them. But it's not totally uncomfortable. But thankfully, the seats are supportive enough. Because if they weren't, well, you're just going to feel every pebble on the road out there. So what do we think of the Renegade? Well, it's certainly not perfect. Well, the transmission could do a bit of work and fuel economy could definitely be better. But the Renegade offers something most of its competitors don't, and that's charm and character. As I said, this is something you won't lose in a car park. It just looks very distinct. Even if you paint it in white or gray, it doesn't look like any other crossover out in the world, or even here locally. Now at 1,640,000 pesos, it's a little more expensive than other subcompact crossovers. But what you're getting here is something different. And if it's being different, that's what you want, then this is something worth considering. If you could live with the quirks and whatnot, the Renegade is something you could park in your driveway. Yes, putting a Renegade in your driveway is a little bit risky, especially that most of us have become accustomed to Japanese marks. But you have to look back at Jeep. They wouldn't have gone anywhere if they didn't take the risk. And that's why maybe you could consider a Renegade in your driveway. This is Anton and Just from AutoIndustriya.com. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Hope you enjoyed this good review.